that, I'd like to welcome to the stage Ken. He is one of the very first DevOpsDays folk around here. He's been around.
I'm old.
Yeah, since DevOps is such an old movement, right?
Not that I'm old.
But Ken here, he's going to be going over some of the what it takes to have a successful DevOps movement, and I believe that the title is "You Only Have to Change Everything." Right? Is that
close?
Something along those lines?
A little bit of a spoiler there.
Ah, sorry about that.
That's okay.
All right, Ken, take it away.
Thank you. Okay, so John totally set me up this morning. You already seen this quote, but I'm going to do it in a little bit of different context. 2006, Werner Vogel's being interviewed, said, "You build it, you run it." And the quote's been used many, many times, often in the context of, as John mentioned, the developers have pagers and so forth and so on. We don't need as much operations. We don't need as much this or much that, or et cetera. But the funny thing is that's not why they did it. If you go read the entire article, assuming that my thing, see, you got to turn it on. How do I computer? Okay. If you go read the actual article, they did it to put the development teams in closer contact with the customers. So just like EPB was just saying, they did it so the developer teams could know if they changed a thing, did we sell more or less shoes? Books or widgets or what have you. It wasn't about less operations. It was about putting people closer to the customer. So the actual title of that is that. You only have to change one thing, but the catch is it's everything. Okay. Well, I'll get to some of that. So some of the things I'm going to talk about. I think definitions of words are important. I'll go into why. Not everybody agrees, of course. It's really common that you might have to look at your organizational structure to really get the benefits of DevOps and continuous delivery. It's not uncommon to have to look at the architecture of your systems. Continuous delivery is supposed to be there for a safety net. John talked a lot about that with security and so forth. That's what that's really for. You can't just choose one. You kind of have to do the whole thing. It all goes together. So this talk comes from, I've been at ThoughtWorks for about 10 years. We've done some of the earlier work on continuous delivery and so forth. As Alex mentioned, I'm one of the DevOpsDays core organizers with John and several others. That's me on Twitter, if you want to see my rants, et cetera. Okay, so what do I mean by defining words? So I think it's important at the micro level, so at your team, your organization, what have you, that you agree on what things mean. I don't think it's important that you agree with me or another organization or what have you. But if you're in your organization and you say we're doing functional tests, everybody should know what that means, okay, so that we're on the same page, so forth. So I'm going to, of course, pick on DevOps. What isn't DevOps? I work for a tool vendor. There is no such thing as a DevOps tool. Okay, I mean, there are monitoring tools, there are continuous delivery tools, there are alert tools, there are observability tools, there are all these different things. They're all part of a DevOps culture, but there's no such thing as a DevOps tool. I'm going to apologize in advance to those of you who think you exist. You don't. There's no such thing as a DevOps engineer. Obviously, I'm kidding. I mean, LinkedIn and Glassdoor are both listed among the top 1 or 2 hottest job titles in the country. Unfortunately, it really shouldn't be a role. As I'll go into a little bit more, it really shouldn't be an individual. It also really shouldn't be a team. I was very proud of John for not making eye contact this morning when he talked about going over in the corner when you want to make fun of DevSecOps, because that's me. I think of DevOps as verbs, not nouns. Okay, it's not developers and operators. It's developing and operating, which should include security and UX and compliance and all of the things. So I don't have a problem with DevSecOps, and actually John has a very good point. We need a cattle prod to get people moving and so forth. I don't want to let other people off the hook. I don't want to say team 1 is doing DevSecOps, so you have to do all the security. Team 2 is doing DevOps, so you don't. Okay, everybody has to do it. In 2010, when John brought the DevOpsDays, which is where the term DevOps came from, if you all didn't know that, back to the US, he wrote a blog, and I don't know, I think he's out there holding court, as somebody said it to me earlier, but he wrote a blog saying what DevOps means to me, and he came up with this acronym called CAMS. So culture, automation, measurement, and sharing. And this is a lot where I say, again, DevOps isn't a tool. There's automating tools out there. You know, there's measurement tools out there for sure. There's sharing with Slack and so forth, and conferences and all that kind of stuff. But it's inclusive. Very shortly after this, a bunch of people added lean in the middle. So comms. So Jez, and I think probably John, because I mean, if you look at Butcher Glue Twitter handle, the pictures of Edward Deming. This is kind of the father of lean. So you'll find most mature organizations are doing lean flow for their development and stuff. They're not doing iterative development. I won't join the safe bashing, although I'm very tempted. And I am just cocky enough that I wrote my own definition. I did this so that you know what I mean when I say DevOps. So for the rest of this talk, or if we're in open space later, if you read one of my blogs or what have you, it's a culture. We're people, regardless of title or background. So it is user experience on the team. It is security on the team. It is the people. Okay, develop a system. Imagine, develop, deploy, and operate a system, which might mean an org change. If you've ever taken like beginner agile training, you might have seen this, the old traditional model. The development team, then we throw it off to some testing team, then we throw it off to some operations team. And testing team here, I mean, you know, this could be compliance, it could be security, it could be anything. But again, separate team. And of course, we have to put the walls in between for communication, where they really don't know why they're doing the thing or how they got it or what it was or why we're, you know, et cetera. What's the business value, et cetera. I can't believe I'm the first one to use this one today. Mel Conway wrote a paper from which came Conway's Law in 1967. And basically what he said is that your systems are going to end up mirroring your organizational structure. So if you have an organizational structure where these folks are responsible for billing, you're going to end up with an architecture where billing's separate. And that might be fine, but it's going to mirror, so you need to know that. And so if we go back to our traditional model, there are things that in my 10 years of doing this, I've noticed usually don't work. I'm very opinionated, but there are no absolutes. This is one of the ones that might be an absolute. Renaming ops team to DevOps team does not work. Sorry. It's very, very common. And now we learn some configuration management tools and some continuous delivery tools, et cetera. But it's really the communication silos are still there. Creating a new silo generally does not solve silos. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about platforms, and this one has this is a 50-50 one. Okay, but if you have a DevOps team and their responsibility is to create the automation for everybody else, but the other people don't have any idea how that automation works, probably going to have problems. Because when there's downtime, not if, when, the people doing the code don't know how to do the automation to get it deployed, and you know, it's communication. Okay? So this is where the whole thing of products, not projects, comes in. I would much rather see product teams that are multifaceted, that have different skill sets, you know, et cetera. This is where some of the traditional ops people, which is my background, racking and stacking, get really nervous. I don't want to be on a product team. Don't worry, I got you. Just give me 10, 12 minutes, somewhere in there. Okay, but we want to own things as a product. So if we're writing the service that calculates tax and has to know what all the different states are and all the different countries are and everything else, that is a product. We wrote it, we maintain it, we're the ones that get called if it goes down, you know, et cetera. There are other models, but that outside the scope of the 30 minutes. But now, one of the most common things we hear when we talk about continuous delivery is, well, that won't work here because our architecture X, or what have you. Might be true, okay? But Hewlett-Packard now does continuous delivery on printer firmware. If they can do it, you can do it. Okay? But they didn't do it by downloading a continuous delivery tool. They did it by re-architecting the firmware. They literally had to rewrite it. And I don't remember the exact numbers, but they went from a very low percentage of time spent doing new product innovation to a very high number because now they get more throughput. So this is where the buzzwords come in. And we don't mean them to be buzzwords, but that's what they are. You know, monoliths can be, okay, is this better, Chris? Thank you, yeah. Chris organizes DevOpsDays Atlanta if you want to speak next year. Anyway, monoliths can be hard for some of this stuff. So we had a client, it's a travel company, you know, in monolith, everything's in one process. They needed to scale and change certain parts of their business faster than other parts of their business. So nobody rents a car in New York City, or very few people do. If you do, you're nuts, okay? But lots of people reserve hotels. Whereas where I live in Seattle, everybody rents a car because we have no mass transit, and it's a little more scattered around. But in order to scale hotels in New York, they had to scale car rentals in New York. And so they end up paying for all this infrastructure that they don't need. Not to mention they couldn't react quickly. So when they went to microservices, it wasn't about buzzword compliance. Please don't decompose your things into microservices because it's cool. They needed to react faster on certain parts of their application. So in this case, what they did is they took out a specific service, and I don't remember which one it was, architected it as a microservice, which Sam Newman, former colleague, but Sam Newman, who wrote the book on microservices, says, how big is a microservice? He's like, yeah, you could rewrite it in another language in a few weeks. So, you know, how big is it? I don't know. But they took the microservice for this part, built it up, got it up, tested it, and then changed the calls in the monolith over to this new service. And scaled the monolith down by a massive percentage, saved tons of money. Because the thing they needed to scale was actually just this one tiny part, but they were paying for all the deployment. And so you build that out further. And oh, by the way, the microservices get easier to develop smaller pieces and deploy more often and do all the testing that we're going to get into in a second. And so it's possible that if you have a huge, nasty monolith and you do need, for business reasons, to move faster, and like, you know, we joked earlier, but I'm old, you know, and legacy software, the other word for it is the stuff that makes our money. Okay, so let's not just throw it away. But if you do have stuff that you need to move faster and what have you, this might be a way you can do that. So then we go back to our product teams. Now they own certain parts of the business. And so, you know, as Debbie was saying earlier, when we have a problem we're trying to solve, we get the user experience people in, and we talk about how can we make rental cars easier, you know, and so forth. For the first time, I landed in Atlanta, I opened up my Avis app, and it let me choose my car. I'm like, that's cool, because we're thinking about buying a 4Runner, and now I get to rent one. Okay, I mean, that was cool. But they got to do that because they own it as a product, and they move it along, so forth. So homework, one byproduct of a 30-minute talk. You don't have to read the whole things. And again, just because I want to disclose bias. Most of the books in here are written by current or former coworkers, so there is bias. That's it. Building Microservices by Sam Newman and Evolutionary Architectures. Nice thing about Evolutionary Architectures is it's not architecture specific. It talks about building your software in a way that you can evolve as things change. So when the Kubernetes killer comes out in 2 years, you know that you're better able to react to that. Okay, so we got all these product teams, we got all these little neat microservices, and everything's cool, but the truth is, they still need computers. You still have to deploy them somewhere, right? And so I'm a huge fan of platforms as a service. So Scott's talk and everything, huge fan of platforms. I want to clarify, if I can, some terms. I'm going to use rental cars again. If we think of car as a service, so we have infrastructure as a service and platform and software as a service, et cetera. If you think of a car, if you own it, that's on premises. Okay, so it's all your problems, all your responsibility. You have to buy all the things, you have to fix the tires, usually, et cetera. Infrastructure as a service is very close to a leased car. Okay, so the lease company is going to take the brunt of bad depreciation and so forth. I leased a plug-in electric car, and the depreciation, when I traded it in, it was worth half of what my value was. Lease company took that hit, I didn't. That's why I released it. Platform as a service, you still have the fuel and the road toll, you still have to drive it, but they're going to provide everything else, and then of course SaaS, you just log in. Platform as a service has a really good place in this world of doing DevOps continuous delivery. So one firm example. If you are a US government organization and you want to put something on a public cloud, there's a ton of things that you have to do, of security controls that you have to have, and et cetera. 325 of them. There's an organization called cloud.gov that provides a platform to these government organizations that handles 269 of those. Because a lot of them are things like operating system patches and DNS and those kinds of things, which can be handled at the platform level. You don't necessarily have to have unique knowledge about the app running on the thing to know that you have to put the Linux patch on there. Okay, 41 of them are shared, so your app and theirs touches it, and 15 are totally your responsibility. So as a development team, as a product team, you went from 325 to, well, if we take half of 20 and roughly 30-ish, if we half value for the 41. Okay, so it got a lot easier for you to deploy to the cloud. But okay, like John, I fly around a lot. I ain't never looked out the window and seen a computer. I mean, somebody has to run these things, okay? And so that's where, now I'm going to come, those that used to like to rack and stack and I scared with the product teams, here's where I got you. So we have product teams, but that doesn't mean everybody in your organization is necessarily on a product team. It could, but it doesn't have to. You might still have things like a platform team. So Scott's team at Cisco, who knows Kubernetes and everything, so you don't have to. You have to know the deployment tools and that kind of stuff, but they got it. They're going to do the Kubernetes. They're going to run the patches. They're going to make sure that, as John mentioned earlier, if you take the Docker secure templates, they're not on by default in Kubernetes. Platform team's going to take care of that. They got you. Okay. I wish that every team had every skill set, but you're not going to get compliance people on every team. That's just the reality. But it's kind of important. So we still want those folks. So we still have those folks. And we probably still have security teams. Now, the whole shift left thing, and I know, being all the buzzword compliant here, of putting more security stuff in your pipeline, which I'm going to talk about here in a second, is real, and you need to do that. But there's still my friend Jason, who sits in a dark room and hacks at his own company's stuff and finds stuff that no automated tool's ever going to find. And you still need Jason. So let's talk about a little bit about continuous delivery. So as I mentioned, definitions are important to me. This is Jez Humble's definition of continuous delivery. Jez was one of the three folks from ThoughtWorks that presented that white paper in 2006 called the Agile Production Line, or Software Production Line. And then he and Dave Farley wrote a book called Continuous Delivery. But notice on his definition here what it says. Changes of all types. New features, configuration changes, bug fixes, and experiments. Everything into production, into the hands of users, safely and quickly in a sustainable way. So all types, safely. Homework, that's the book he wrote with the guy Dave Farley, as I mentioned. So the title of if you look at the program, you notice the title of this talk, you only have to change one thing to do the DevOps. You may notice that do the DevOps is in quotes. Because I say you can't do DevOps. Likely continuous delivery is what you do as part of a DevOps culture. And configuration management and all the testing and et cetera. Okay, but continuous delivery has a very serious prerequisite that too many people skip. And that's continuous integration. They are not the same thing. Okay, so Having good continuous integration practices, which is another whole talk into itself, but good unit tests, good test coverage, good linting, good et cetera, is a prerequisite. If you have applications that don't have good basic like unit testing, and you're designing a pipeline, stop. Okay, fix the unit tests first, fix those kind of tests first, then go to the pipeline. There's a thing called State of the DevOps Report that one of the metrics they look at, it's a survey, is how often people deploy, deploys per day as a metric. Not terrible about the terribly crazy about the metric, but in 2016 to 17, the number of deploys per day by their high performers went up. The mean time to recovery, though, also went up, meaning they were deploying more often, but the deploys were lower quality. Okay, it's because they were using deploys per day as the metric. That's all they cared about. That's what they optimized to. So they weren't properly tested. They didn't have all the things. So you want to make sure, be careful with the metrics, and you have to have the CI. It was funny that he said security theater early, because we do a thing called the Tech Radar, and in there we have a pattern, or an anti-pattern, called CI theater. And it's the illusion of practicing continuous integration. So I have a step in my build that says CI, but I don't have good test coverage, et cetera. The scary part is, to me anyway, is we did a follow-up survey. %90 of people thought that downloading our product GoCD, downloading Jenkins, downloading Bamboo meant they were doing CI. Nope. Okay. So having a tool isn't the same as doing the practices. These are practices and they are work. Our chief scientist and Jez wrote, Martin Fowler and Jez Humble wrote a thing called the Continuous Integration Certification Test. For us, these are the things required if you're doing CI. So every developer commits at least daily to the shared mainline. This one can be quite the debate. This is VI versus Emacs, et cetera. But we don't do long-lived branches, ever. Everyone's committing to mainline every day. Every commit triggers CI/CD. And if the build test fails, it's repaired. Jez says 10 minutes. That might be a little aggressive, but immediately. Okay, it's nothing wrong with your continuous delivery server going red. That's its job. It's not okay to leave it red. Okay, false positives, as John mentioned, flaky tests, those things are your enemy. Like you said, go after them, kill them. It's okay if it goes red, but when it's red, we have to know that means something. And I put this back in because John showed it. I wish he was here because he was slightly off on the history. It was actually created for a sales deck about the same time as that one, but anyway. But the idea here is that the things are going through stages and they have to go further along and so forth, okay? And I'm going to be a little snarky here. Okay, continuous delivery is not taking your continuous integration thing and adding a deployment at the end and calling it continuous delivery. It's different. There's more testing. There's more verification. There's more to it. And so, sorry, but it's just not the same thing. That's why a lot of purists will blanch a little bit when they see like CI/CD. People do the CI/CD, like they're the same thing, just two different words for the same thing. They're not. Okay, continuous delivery is the ability to deploy your software into production at any time. I say it's not continuous delivery if you can't deploy right now. If you don't have a system that you can walk up to at this moment, click a button and do a production deployment safely, it's not continuous delivery. Doesn't mean you don't have good automated build and test. I'm not saying you're evil, okay, but it's not CD. Two phrases that are often confused and should not be: continuous delivery versus continuous deployment. Continuous delivery is I can deploy anytime I want. Continuous deployment is I actually do. If all the tests pass, it goes into production automatically. Okay, so it's a business decision which you want to do it. People laugh because, GoCD, the project I work on, continuous delivery server, we don't do continuous deployment. We deploy roughly once a month. We're like, once a month? It's on-premises open source software. Do you want to have them bouncing your CD server 5 times a day with every build? No. So the business thing is that. If you're doing Photoshop and you give me a new release every day, I'm going to be very angry with you because they're huge. I wish Sony would get that thing on PS4 updates, but anyway. Okay, so back to our teams. What's their role in continuous delivery? I really want to give the development teams a direct path to production. Nobody in between them and production. This rightfully scares the heck out of a lot of people. There's nothing stopping me from writing an app, putting ThoughtWorks logo on it, deploying it to Azure, calling it good. But there's some things that are bad. We really shouldn't deploy insecure software. We should stop. I was glad the Sonatype thing is now at 10%. It was at 23 the year before. Okay, non-performance software, non-compliant software, ineffective software. So Debbie's point about user experience. Okay, we don't measure this very often. Did we sell less books? So most people, I think, agree with this one. This was not controversial. That the purpose of a CD pipeline is to kill a release candidate. Every time I commit source code or configuration change or anything else, that is a release candidate. It's the CD's pipeline to prove it's not good enough. Okay, you can't prove something's good, but you can absolutely prove it's bad. You can't prove something's secure, but you can prove it's insecure. Okay, so take us back to our pipeline. Again, I wish the security people were part of the team. They're probably not, or at least not full depth, okay? So in your pipeline, you can run entire other pipelines in parallel. This is not like another Jenkins job. This is not Chrome and Firefox. I'm talking about entirely separate pipelines that use a concept called diamond dependencies or fan in, fan out, where when the dev team builds their new thing, they build their new jar file, the pipeline takes it on to functional tests at the same time. It takes the same jar, pulls it in, and starts running the automated security tests. The functional tests might run 10 times for every one that the security tests do, but they're running in parallel. But the arrows here are not just symbolic. This will block a production deployment. And so again, I might run my functional tests and deploy to staging a dozen times, but if my security tests haven't passed, it's not going to production. So continuous delivery is about safely, and it can do these things. Same with compliance tests. Okay, so server spec, inspect from the chef folks out there, et cetera. There's a lot of things that we can do that we can test every single time. There's a lot of things we can't. Okay, but John mentioning all those CVEs. There are systems that automatically will scan your code and see if you're using the libraries that have known exploits. They're actually really easy to run, and they should be in your pipeline. This is one of the things I get a little bit upset with is people like, oh yeah, I got my path to production, I need to get it down. It's like 2.5 minutes. Bull. Sorry. If you're getting to production that fast, you probably are skipping a whole bunch of stuff. Now, you should have a way to get to production that fast. Okay, in our production pipeline, we have a short circuit from first build to production where we can skip all the other stuff. Now, it trails. But again, we're building constantly, and so we're still pretty confident. But if there's a security problem that we need to react to, well, when Heartbleed came out, we had updated our production servers in 40 minutes. From email to, oh gosh, change Puppet manifest and committed it to the pipeline. The product manager at the time went in, hit the short circuit button because he's the only one that had permission, deployed it to production, done. When I say you have to change everything, I've seen too often, and pick your change to your structure or change to any kind of methodology, whether it be agile or RUP before that or whatever. You really have to do all the things. Just standing up for your meetings doesn't make you agile. Okay, just automating your deployment doesn't mean continuous delivery or DevOps. You really need to get and think about closer to the customer. The good thing is that these are mostly solved problems. Okay, take Jeff up or Alex up on his thing about the local DevOps meetup and so forth. There are people doing these things. Here's some more good books that will help you if you want to look at them. So summary. I don't care if you agree with my definition of DevOps. I mean, I'd like to talk to you, but I don't care. But come up with your own. And I don't care because I don't care if mine's right, put it that way. But come up with your own, take a big poster of it, put it on the wall so that your team agrees what they mean. What are you trying to do? Okay? This might be org change. Matter of fact, if you really only could do one thing, it probably is org change. I'd rather do product teams and more manual process than project teams. You may have to do architecture change. The travel agency that I talked about, this was an 18-month project. So, I'm not trying to scare anybody, but this is real work. And again, the purpose of a continuous delivery pipeline isn't to get to your stuff to production faster. That is absolutely not the purpose. It's to deploy safely more often. Okay? Yes, we want to deploy more often, don't get me wrong. But it's the continuous delivery pipeline's job to prove that we can do that without taking down our business. I also will be around all day. Happy to answer questions, reach out on Twitter and so forth. Thank you for your time.